Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's edition of You're Leaving Again. My name is Laura, your USO host, and we wanted to kick off the new year with the topic of parenting, especially parenting when one parent is physically separated from the rest of the family. You don't need me to tell you that parenting can be challenging under the best of circumstances, but you throw in the military lifestyle and the frequent separations, and parenting can just get really challenging, especially when you're trying to be a united front in front of your kids. But that's why we're so excited to have Corie and Matt with us today to talk through how you can successfully co-parent and as a team, despite the distance. They're going to take us through their current deployment and pull from some of the wisdom that they've gained over some previous times separation because of the military. So with that, I'd love to give a warm USO welcome to Corie and Matt Weathers, who are here today. Thank you both for joining us. We appreciate your time. And I will hop in the chat box with Trish, but I'll be on at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Trish. Hey, everybody. I know we have people that are still coming in. My name is Corie. This is my amazing husband, Matt.
My name is Matt.
Chiming in from afar. We're so excited to spend some time with you guys today on a topic that is like a huge topic. I mean, definitely a big topic for us in our life and in our relationship, but one that brings a lot of anxiety, especially for military couples. It can bring a lot of anxiety of what does it look like to raise amazing military kids, and what does it look like to launch them well? Can you launch them well? And in full transparency, our kids are 13 and 16. And this is our third official deployment. We've gone through other military separations as well. So we are really excited to spend some time with you guys. And, in preparing for today, Matt and I spent some time talking about like what would we cover, and when you registered, you should have gotten a listening guide that we created for you guys. And I am going to not go through that listening guide in detail today. It's got some great tips and tips for every stage of whatever your kids' ages are. But you guys submitted such wonderful questions in preparation for today's talk that we just decided we were going to spend most of our time talking about your questions and taking your questions. So we're going to go through those today, but we're also inviting you to put those questions in the chat box. There's also the Q&A box if you want to do that a little bit more privately. And like they said, you can always send it to just panelists if you don't want it to go out to everybody. So we welcome you guys to put those in the chat thread or in the Q&A box, and Laura and Trish will also be monitoring those in case we miss them. So I think to start off, Matt, why don't you just maybe just very quickly introduce us a little bit more and update everybody on where we're at. I don't even know what month deployment we're on now. 2?
Yeah, we're just starting the third month.
Okay, it's all going together.
So all coming together. So like Corie said, this is our third deployment. Hey, my name is Matt Weathers. I'm a chaplain in the United States Army, and everything that I say will be my own opinion and is not a reflection of the Department of Defense, the United States military, the United States Army, my unit, or anybody else other than me and probably my wife. But she could probably refute some of the things that I would say too, so I don't even speak for her. So that much being said, this is our third deployment. Our first two were both to Afghanistan a long time ago. And our kids were, gosh, like 2 and 5, and then they were 4 and 7 at those deployments. So they were really young, and it was right after we came into the military. So right off the bat, we were getting our feet wet and getting used to the military life and deployment. We were trying to figure it out for our marriage, and also trying to figure it out for our kids as well. And a funny note, and we'll talk about this question later. Somebody asked about the journal, but I'd gone back over the last about month here, gone back and pulled a lot of old emails and put them into another journal entry, so I could just look back and see what we talked about and what our experiences was on that deployment. And one of the things that I saw a lot of were little videos that I made for the boys. So it was interesting to see how far we've come, but also how intentional that we've focused on being And we understand that being intentional is hard. It's going to take energy. It's going to take compromise. It's going to take being graceful with yourself and with your spouse as you go through it. So that's us, I guess, in a nutshell. Hello, I'm in a nutshell. I don't know what I mean. So.
No, I mean, this is such a huge topic. The military lifestyle, whether you're National Guard, reserves, I would love to see you guys put in the chat, like, let us know, are you active duty? Are you a spouse? Are you a service member? Are you reserves, National Guard? Let us know kind of where you're coming from, maybe. We love to interact with you guys. It makes it it just makes it better. And we're not here to kind of tell you, give you all the right answers. We're coming here with a humble heart, saying that we're in the thick of it and learning ourselves. But there are some definite things we'd love to share that we felt like we did right. And there's some things that we could have done better, and still things that we're learning today that we're going to be authentic about here. So we love to see you guys interact, but the military lifestyle, regardless of what branch you're in, is definitely challenging and adds complexity to your relationship and to parenting and how you parent. And so I had a conversation with somebody about a week ago about whether or not, and I know there's probably a lot of opinions on this, but whether or not a military marriage is different from a civilian marriage. And my argument is we just have a different set of challenges that we have to work through, especially when you have to spend time apart from each other and figure out how to work together as a team for long durations apart. And of course, the civilian community, there are people that travel for their jobs, and we have a lot of those that retire out of the military and then go back in as contractors, and their lifestyles feels very much the same as when they were in. So there's definitely a lot of similarities, but for today, we just want to normalize the fact that this is a difficult lifestyle and it is challenging, and it's okay for you to struggle with it a little bit, and sometimes okay to struggle with it a lot. So I love the fact that you guys are already chiming in. We've got an active duty Air Force spouse. We got National Guard. Let's see, Navy. And coming from Italy, which is so fun. They have 4 kids that some of them are teenagers. A lot of Air Force, Army. Where's the Army? Represent here. But I'm so excited to have Air Force. My dad was an Air Force pilot, so that's super fun. Marines is here. Megan is great. Okay, so keep it coming, and let us know where you're watching from. There's Army. Where you're watching from, and if you have
National Guard.
National Guard. If you have kids, some of you guys have already posted the ages of your kids. Maybe let us know, like, how old are your kids if you have them. And it's okay if you're watching and you don't have kids, but are thinking about that, or just wanting to get some information that might help somebody else. So you don't have to be a parent to be in the webinar today. So this is fantastic. While you guys are putting this in the chat box, wonderful. I see all of it coming through. We would love to just give a very brief update. If you've been watching the series, this is a monthly series. The USO is following us during this deployment, and we kind of just decided we were going to be authentic with our journey because we needed content. I know I needed content that covers like the ups and downs of spending that time apart as a couple, and some of the successes and also some of the lessons learned. I know I wouldn't be where I am today if there was not amazing people who had shared lessons learned and mentored me through the process. And so what was I going to say about that? Parenting, kids, success.
I don't know. You were on a roll. I'm just watching.
The series.
I'm
Sorry.
watching everybody chime
I know.
in
I got
with
distracted.
Their
I got
kids
so
and ages and locations.
That's what got me distracted too.
Like, oh, I know that place. Oh, I know that place.
I know, that's what distracted me too. So now going back to the series, if you're just watching for the first time, the USO has been following us since October, where we were doing these topical monthly webinars as we go through the deployment. So October was on the tension before the deployment, and you guys know there's always this big argument and all this tension before you rip the Band-Aid. November, we talked about ripping the Band-Aid and what it's like to actually say goodbye and kind of get, mission minded and set those goals for yourself and all the emotions that come with that. December, we of course couldn't go through December without not only checking in on how we were doing and some of the new goals that we were trying to establish for ourselves, but also talking about How do you do holidays apart? And it's not just about Christmas. It could be about any holiday, birthday, religious holiday, anything like that. So we covered that in December. And so we just knew parenting was a huge topic and we wanted to make sure we addressed that with you guys. So after today, this is being recorded. After today, I will update that listening guide that you guys have access to. And it will be put on the dashboard where you can access all those other webinars that we've done already and also register for new ones. I will tell you, I'll remind you this at the end. In February, we're going to be talking about intimacy. And then we have other ones coming up on finance, because finance can definitely be an issue for a lot of couples. We're also going to talk about betrayal. That is a big topic that comes up a lot. I am a military and first responder clinical counselor, so I do a lot of marriage therapy, and that's definitely something I see coming into counseling, in addition to finances and communication and all that. So we just knew that it's a big topic. So we definitely wanted to address some of the bigger topics that couples struggle with. So that's what the series is. Welcome. I think, Matt, would you mind just kind of telling everybody kind of how we've been doing since last month, and maybe specifically what kinds of things that we were trying to do with the kids for this deployment and some of the things that we've learned?
Okay, so for this deployment, we obviously have better connectivity than we had for the first two, mainly because, it's 10 years later and iPhones actually exist. But also, we have Wi-Fi where we're at. Originally, since the boys are 13 and 16, about, when was that? 2016? I used to make fun of the boys for playing Minecraft. I was like, you guys, what are you going to do with your lives? You're just going to sit around and play video games? And then I had to go through shoulder surgery and then re-injured that shoulder about 2 weeks later. And then my wife was like, you are going to sit down. She actually knife handed me. You were going to sit down and not move that shoulder. Double knife hands. And so I sat down, got involved. And so the boys and I began to create this Minecraft world back then and just had a blast. And it's kind of been our thing ever since then, is to create little Minecraft worlds, go in and explore and have fun and work together. And so the intent was on this deployment that I would get connected out here, go over to the MWR and play with them. And up to this point, we haven't been able to do that. And so we're still trying to figure out how we're going to make that happen, because that was the intent for us to be able to have that level of connection. And we realized that, we're probably in the 10% of people who are deployed. And, those are kind of first world problems on deployment that I can't, go over and play video games in the MWR. But because of the amenities that we had, that was our intent. And so what we've had to do is really scale that back. So really what we're doing is we're just playing really long games of Scrabble with one another on our devices, which is interesting because I finally came clean after about 3 games and told the boys that I was using Scrabble cheat on Google. And that's how I was coming up with the big words and beating them. So then they upped their game. And so now it's really fun to be able to do that. Our boys with coronavirus had been on virtual school. And so up till last Friday, they'd been home during the day. And because of the time difference between where I'm at and where they are, I was able to check in with them throughout the day. But now that they're at school, the only time I could probably check in with them is before they leave for school in the morning, or drop little notes to them and text during the day, distract them so the teacher yanks their device away. So we're trying to make it work. We're having to be really creative with it. But one of the things that I found important for parenting both the boys is to continually pour life into the person that's actually doing the heavy lifting over there. So continually investing in Corie. So if I'm not able to do that really good one-on-one directive time, the best thing I can do right now as a parent is to make sure she has everything she needs and a lot of the things she wants, and some stuff that I know she needs, but she doesn't say she wants, like that huge whiteboard that I bought for you about 2 weeks ago. So that's the strategy right now.
He has definitely enjoyed gifting us with ways of trying to make our life easier around here. For instance, I'm just curious, anybody in the chat thread, have you tried the HelloFresh boxes, or maybe you've tried the Blue Apron? That's the thing that we tried this week. He was like, you know what? I'm going to send these boxes, just try them. We can cancel it if we need to, but it's 2 dinners that you don't have to figure out and go get ingredients for. And just as kind of trying to help with that strategy of Trish has tried it, yeah. That just kind of trying to help with the strategy and like reduce the level of responsibility, the load here at the house. And so I mean it was delicious last night, I will say that. But it was, I had pros and cons on it. Like it was like work to do it, but I sure did love the fact that all the ingredients are right there, and that was great. So
Well, the reason
I'm on
we
the
got
flip.
that was because Jack, you know what? Huh? What?
Yeah,
What?
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, the reason we got that was because usually if we're standing next to one another, I just kind of nudge Corie. So it's real hard to nudge you from thousands of kilometers away. It is what it is. But as our 13-year-old Jack decided he wanted to make dinner, and he has started wanting to become like master chef baker. And there's only so much you really need bread in the house, or sweetbreads especially. So I figured, with HelloFresh, he can just grab the ingredients, he can actually start practicing, and we can start setting them on the path towards, self-sustaining, so we can just walk away for weeks on end and they can feed themselves.
Isn't that the goal of parenting?
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I'm going to leave now and I'll see you in a month.
do not neglect your children. We did not say that. No, but that's exactly what the strategy was. It was how do we use this as an opportunity with Matt being gone, and the fact that we do need to cook dinner in this house as an opportunity to take the load off of me just a little bit, but also teaching them that life skill. And it does require, obviously, my supervision and parenting through that. But on the other side, I'm not having to think and go and get ingredients, which is what the conversation was turning into. If you guys want to cook dinner on Tuesday night, like let me know. And then I need to go to the grocery store. And now it's like 2 hours of my evening trying to get that prepared. So that's a couple of strategies that we have been working on, and we're going to address some as we go through your questions. I will definitely say I've now parented during a deployment during COVID in both ways, where we had the boys home 24/7, where we were really isolating there for a little while. And now we made a mental health decision really for them to go back to school. Their grades were slipping a little bit and they were starting to struggle, which is really hard for especially high school. And I would imagine for the really young ones too, to really grasp the information that they needed to. And so we made that decision for them to go back to school. Which does change a lot of, especially time, like Matt was saying, and being able to connect with their dad because of their schedule. Because for sure, our middle schooler will get his phone taken away if he responds to a text during the day. So here's the thing. We're going to definitely unpack a little bit more how we're doing and what we're doing in this deployment, as well as what we've done in other deployments, and what we've learned as we go through your questions. But we're going to dive into some of the questions that you guys submitted because they were so good, and there's so much information that we could really have fun with on this that we want to just jump in. So, of course, if you have questions that you did not submit or you're just now thinking, please go ahead and put them in the chat or in the Q&A. And we will definitely make sure we try to address them. Like we said, we're trying to jump into this a little bit more rather than just kind of talking at you or just kind of talking to each other necessarily, and really getting to the meat of it. Okay, so Matt, the first question that we got was, how do you go from dual to single parenting since he's gone and I'm the disciplinarian and I'm tired of always feeling like the bad guy? So this is obviously a spouse, it's before deployment. You guys are parenting as a team or kind of doing it together, and then he leaves. I know there's a lot of stereotyping. I know we have female service members that are going too, but service member goes, and then you feel, I'll definitely answer this, but I'm gonna let you go first, Matt, if you want to. You suddenly feel like you're disciplining all the time, and you're feeling like you're starting to feel like you're becoming the bad guy. Do you want to go, or do you want me to go?
Why don't you go first, because you've got more experience at that? I mean, I've got that week where you were gone, but I don't really think I can compete.
Yeah, and he's referencing the week that I got to go overseas with the Secretary of Defense, where it was a really interesting role reversal, and so there was a lot of things that you did get to experience, and so maybe even you sharing what that experience was like for you to take
Mhm.
them out to eat after you took them to the movie was, I think, a really powerful moment. That was a lot of fun. Okay, thank you, Megan. I appreciate that. Okay, so here's what I would say about this. I won't go into this in detail because I could do a whole webinar on Maslow's ladder, but Maslow has what's called a hierarchy of need. And he basically says we all have needs and we are all striving for a sense of peace and purpose in our life and knowing who we are and what we're talented and created to do in this world. However, there are needs that we have to fulfill before we can ever start to think about that. So, in other words, we have the basic needs of food, shelter, sleep. And if we don't have that, if we don't have a roof over our heads, or if we're like hangry, right? We're not thinking about our ultimate purpose in life. No, we're just thinking about the fact that we need a sandwich. Which, by the way, for those of you who have toddlers, it's something for you to think about, right? Sometimes I have two boys. One in particular, as a toddler, really gave me a lot of the gray hair that I have right now, because I think he was hangry all the time. But the deal of it is here that when you go through a separation like this, the next ladder, the next need, if all of your basic needs are met, food, shelter, water, food, all that's like set, the next thing that Maslow says we really desperately need in our life is routine and structure and security and safety and feeling like we kind of have a handle on things, right? And so I think the first thing here is realizing that a deployment or a military separation like this disrupts the system. The system is disrupted, the structure, the routine, all of that is disrupted. And so you now are in a position as a parent to kind of feel like you got to navigate, how do I both be the one that's offering grace and comfort and nurturing, that's maybe the good guy, but also having to discipline. And when you don't have somebody to share that with, Matt and I are huge fans in parenting of tag teaming. We actually say that all the time, like, tag, you're it. Like, I'm starting to build in my frustration, and so you better take it and me take a time out. When you can't do that very easily, it does feel like you're starting to become the bad guy all the time. And so I think I just want to start off and say that sometimes for me, I have to kind of pull back and remind myself whenever, and this actually, I kind of came up with this in the very first deployment when they were really small. I would notice that when things started to get chaotic, which is usually when I would get irritable and then start like really like hammering down and disciplining everybody and then getting frustrated that I feel like I'm mad all the time and irritable all the time and disciplining all the time. I learned to, in those moments, kind of pause and go, all right, this is chaotic. Like, I feel chaotic, the home feels chaotic, they probably feel like things are chaotic, and it's not the order and structure that I really want and need it to be, because the order and structure I'm wanting it to be needs to have some element of peace and opportunities for me to be and feel like I'm being a good guy and not feeling like I'm coming down on them all the time. And so those are opportunities in my mind. I still use that even now with them as teenagers. Whenever I feel like things are chaotic or getting out of order, there's a natural human desire to want to order it. And so I just want to just encourage whoever asked that question or whoever's been in that place before, that if you feel like you're always the bad guy, just kind of pause and kind of pull back and go, what kind of order and routine and structure, not in a rigid way, but just kind of basic order can I bring into my life? Maybe it's the chore charts need to change, right? Like if it's that I'm hounding you all the time because you're not on top of tasks, well, maybe they don't understand those tasks and we need a better chore chart, right? It's maybe just time to level up just a little bit. Or I know for this deployment, even for teenagers, I was getting a lot of bad attitudes in the beginning. And so I sat down with them, and the order was me sitting down with them and saying, you know what, I think what I need to do is put out in front of you guys, here are my expectations. Here's what I think I need from you that would bring some order and peace into our home, and how you can help me with that. And as long as you understand that, then that lowers my frustration level, and I'm going to be a whole lot nicer of a mom. And that was my way of kind of creating order for a teenage level. And I think the last thing I would just say is, Really, if your kids are really young, deployment and times when you're solo parenting, it's really, 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 really important to pick your battles, because you could die on a million hills in a day. And I think that this is a time of grace and a time to be graceful with everybody. And that includes being graceful with yourself. And that maybe some things aren't worth pointing out or disciplining on, and it can really start to feel like a expectation of perfection on yourself and on your kids. And so maybe just picking those battles will really help as well. Matt, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, so I was just thinking as you were talking, and this may be a little conceptual. So tell me if it's too conceptual and not pragmatic enough and applicable. But we always talk about, being the good parent, or why do you make me the bad guy? Why do you have to be the good guy? Perhaps for single parenting, you don't need to be, good or bad cop or bad person, bad guy, bad parent, whatever. And we just reframe it into being that we're just raising kids. And really there's bumpers and there's nudging. And so each day there may be more forceful nudging, or there may be more celebrations, there may be more laughter, or one day there may be more behavior corrections that are going on there. But if you stop with the good versus bad, then you won't be sitting there kind of keeping this tally in your head of what it is that you're doing. Did I do enough good, or did I do enough bad? Was I too harsh? And the other thing to reframe is and Corie, you did a really great job with your PDF. And then is being mindful that children react to a loss of control in their environment in different ways than adults do, because they don't have that kind of ability to think abstractly according to a timeline. So you may be sitting there going, hey, we've come through, 65 days of deployment, and we have 100 days left, and I can at least conceptualize where I am in that distance, right? Well, they're just in that one moment, especially if they're very young. And that one moment, they could be like, everything's great and everything's fine. And the next moment, it's not, because then I just realized, mom or dad isn't home. And so now what am I going to do? And now I'm out of control and I'm missing that. So they can go from, being fine one moment to not being fine the next moment, because they don't really have a concept of time or sequence, And so just being, one of the most powerful things that I ever had when we were living in Fort Carson was I came home and both the boys were playing pirates, right? And they were on that bed. You remember that bed we got from Aunt Bobby? And they were on the bed and they were playing pirates from Veggie Tales. And it was the most formative moment for me as a parent of I joined them where they were at, rather than being like, hey, dad just walked in and now let's play this thing that dad wants to play, let's go play Hot Wheels, because that's why I had kids, so that I could buy toys that I didn't get for myself. So let's go play Hot Wheels. But it actually meant the world for me to enter into their world and get wrapped up in what it was that they were going on. So sometimes behavior modification doesn't have to look like disciplining. So if you're just trying to modify behavior, think very creatively about how you can redirect that energy. If that's negative energy, that could be squishing Play-Doh out, and very, a very tactile, very kinesthetic, very hands-on type motion to get that negative energy out, or to join them and go, you know what? I'm feeling that same thing too. I'm tired too, and I'm ready for this to be over too. And so really it's almost like a play therapy type mode of join them where they're at so they can express what it is that they're feeling, because they don't have all the words, they don't have all the concepts. And so they may just be acting out because they are completely out of control of the environment. Whereas I would say the average military spouse does probably sometimes an altogether too good job of going, nope, I'm fine. I'm absolutely fine. Everything is fine. We're all just fine.
But it's so true. It's so true.
Yeah.
But can I just say, I think that we do that sometimes because we don't give ourselves an alternative option to not be fine. Like, because I think if I say I'm not fine, like you've asked me that before, like, how are you really doing? Knowing like tears were right under the surface, you know, and I'm like, I'm good, I'm good, I'm good. And I think it's because at the end of the day, I still have to figure out what to do for myself. You know, at least that's what I was saying in my head, when really in those conversations, what you helped me do once I kind of admitted that I really wasn't fine, was you really ended up helping me strategize. And here's what we could do. And why don't you sit down with them and restructure the chore chart? Or why don't you ask for their help? Or, you know, and the boys are old enough. There was several times even already where you sat down with them and cast vision. Go ahead.
You cannot not you, but anyone, you cannot strategize until you deal with the feeling first. As a
Yes, thank you.
human, you have to first deal with the feeling before you can have, and this goes back to kind of Maslow's ladder, you have to deal with that gut level, visceral thing that's going on inside, acknowledge it, be honest with it, and own it before you can have some upper level thought. Because if you attempt to have this upper level thought or strategy, it will always be pulled one way or another by that feeling, by that anchor. So deal with the feeling first, and then all of a sudden go to the upper level thought.
In other words, what he's saying is the classic. I mean, that definitely applies to children too, but I mean, it applies to the classic marriage struggle of if you need your spouse to just listen to what you're feeling and not go into solution mode, then you need to tell them that. Like, I really just need you to listen and let me just get something out, and then I can go there with you into solution mode. But right now, I just need to be able to say, I feel out of control, or I feel alone, or I feel overwhelmed, or
Mhm.
whatever that state is. And so just being able to, and it's valuing the fact that your helpmate and your spouse wants to help, and that solutions are good and solutions and strategies are helpful when you are overwhelmed. And it's seeing that value for what it is, but it's just communicating again to your spouse the order in which you can best receive it. So that was a great point, Matt.
Mhm.
Okay, so I'm going to jump to this one, which is because I think that this could actually build out the rest of how we answer some of the other questions, which is the best way to work as a team with different views on parenting. When you have
Is
different
that for me?
parenting styles, yeah, why don't you start? Because there's definitely a lot of really great questions in here that are kind of spouse, at home specific. So I wanted to start with this one about, when you have different views on parenting styles, how do you
Mhm.
work together as a team?
So I had to when I originally saw this question, I had to slow my thinking rather than go give like solution. I just saw some of the chat about um, I do believe that men tend to constantly be in solution focused mode. Just because you're like, all right, let's get at it, let's make it happen. But I think part of that is the inability to sit in the discomfort. And it took me like actually going and getting a master's to be able to sit in the discomfort of this somebody else's or even in my own discomfort. So that much being said,
It
I
doesn't come
think,
easy for everybody, is what you're saying.
oh no, 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 and it's especially for men, it does not come easy to sit in the discomfort, to recognize and diagnose the feeling. And even when I've been in a counseling session with other males, um, when I slow them down and acknowledge a feeling, you almost see that aha moment where they're like, "Wow, yeah, that's there. I just didn't know what to do with it, so I wanted to do something about it." That much being said, over to the parenting topic. I think that we parent really out of two things, and I'll say values and our experiences. So if there is a difference in parenting style, you need to like pause, take a time out, and really look at and what your values are. Be able to script those out and understand why they're values to you. Why do they matter? So it's not just about what it is that we're doing that's clashing. Um, there could be either competing values in that moment, or there could be values that align, but just a competition between the way that they are expressed. So, for instance, like, just for Corie and I, if the boys get bored, I'll probably like, I don't know, buy a ping pong table and have it shipped to them because they don't need to be playing video games all day, right? And so I have a value of let's get the kids engaged. I know Corie likes to play ping pong table bought. Ready? Ding! So Corie has a value of saving money and investing and not making rash, impulsive Amazon Prime decisions. So God sent me to her to mess with that a little bit. But so there are there's Corie feels that way and parents that way out of a love for our family, and I parent that way out of a love for our family. So it's the same value, it's just expressed in different ways. And so you've got to like slow down. He just bought a movie projector. Why not? Who wouldn't want a movie projector? They're phenomenal. They're great. Yeah. As a chaplain, I can attest movie projectors are the best. So the other part of it is experience. And so Corie, why don't you talk about sorry, I got to take his side. All right. So why don't you talk about the way I think that experience plays into the differences in parenting and why we need to be aware of our experiences and the imprinting that happened, because we all have those moments where as a kid you go, I am definitely doing that because when my parent did that, it made all the difference. Or I'm definitely not doing that. So why don't you touch on that?
For sure. Yeah, for sure. We all get our ideas of what kind of parent we want to be based off of what we've seen of parenting, which comes from our parents, right? So whether you picked up on things like I'm definitely not going to do that, or I definitely want to do that over there because it was meaningful to me, we kind of start with that beginning imprinting. And so I'll give you an example. My parents divorced when I was 7, so that definitely tells you why why I'm a marriage counselor, right? It definitely solidified and it imprinted for me, like, how can I save relationships and save families so that somebody else doesn't have to go through what I went through as a kid. But because my parents had divorced and I was going back and forth from mom's house to dad's house, when I was at my mom's house, my mom would get up early in the morning. She'd have to go to work. And then I would usually have a school lunch because she would have already left for work and I'd have to get myself to the bus. And that was my experience in the mornings. But when I would go to my dad's house, he was an Air Force Reserves pilot. So when he was home, he was home. But when he was gone, I was back at my mom's house, right? So if he was home, he was there in the morning to not only take me to school on these long drives to school where we talk and listen to NPR, which is probably why I like NPR, right? But like there was like a quality time that was spent there. But he also would make my lunch for me. And the lunches were amazing. Like they were like the big sandwiches with like too much of whatever in the middle, right? And then it would always have a piece of candy in it. And it'd always have like the little Debbie snacks because my mom wouldn't buy those, right? And so it would be like the most amazing lunch. And I'd sit at the lunch table and everybody wanted my lunch, right? And I just felt loved and I felt seen because my dad had taken the time to make these lunches. Well, now that I'm a parent from the very beginning of having kids, I could not wait to make lunches for my kids because that in my mind was an imprinting of love and parenting, right? It's a small example. And so even now when my kids are 13 and 17, even this morning, I was like, do you guys need help with lunches? Do you want any help with lunches? And one of them's like, no, I want a school lunch. And the other one's like, no, I already made it. And I'm like, are you sure? You sure there's nothing you can add to your lunch? Did you put an orange in there? Like, it's just an imprinting that happens in me. And so we have to pay attention to the imprinting. And it really starts to communicate your why that's so important to you, why that different thing, the way that you want to parent. Perhaps you grew up in a very loud home and maybe wasn't necessarily conflict loud. Maybe it was just loud and opinionated in your home. And so parenting and dealing with discipline is a very loud thing that feels very comfortable for you. But if you were brought up in a home that was really quiet and everybody kind of kept those emotions to themselves, that loud parenting style can feel really abrupt, right? And wrong. But it may not necessarily be wrong if it's not actually destructive. And so you have to talk as a couple about where are those beginning imprinting? Where's the beginning imprinting happening and why? What's associated with it? What are the values associated with it? And so let's see, we are getting a couple questions. Let me double check and make sure they're not especially connected to this. So we'll definitely come back to the individual time. I see that one. Okay, so yes, I'm going to come back to that one in just a second. I'll finish this last one on parenting styles and parenting as a team with this. It took Matt and I, we've been married almost 22 years now, and we don't have this perfected at all. But I'll tell you, one of the things that has really, really helped us is seeing not only those experiences and really having conversations around those experiences and understanding, like, all right, time out. Like, why are you so passionate about this moment and dealing with the kids in this way? Because it doesn't match kind of what I'm feeling. And so this is a side conversation, by the way, not in front of the kids, right? But like, you are like way passionate about that. So please help me understand where you're coming from and having conversations about that. But I think what also helped us is to learn and realize that we both were coming to the parenting table with a set of strengths and trying to do the best that we could. We were both not trying to sabotage each other. We're not trying to mess up the situation or be destructive. We actually are both trying. We just are speaking different languages. And so I will say in the military culture, this is going to be a little bit of a stereotype, but what I see is most women, which are a majority of most spouses that are at home, tend to be very high in being empathic and really feeling all of the emotions of the kids and making decisions based off of those emotions. Like you're having a meltdown because there's something you're feeling, and I need to understand what you're feeling in order to address that and temper your temper, right? Whereas men typically are strategic and they are logical in approach, which is not the wrong approach. It's just a different one. So once I realized that, number one, we're both trying here, we both have something to offer and add to the situation. Then it became about how do Matt and I work and do this dance where it's not all the time like one way is the right way. And that sometimes both of us are right. And then there's other times that one needs to take the lead. And then another time it's a better situation where the other one needs to take the lead. And learning to value each other and what we're bringing to the table in different styles worked far more. So Matt, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, and we mentioned this back in December, but it also ties in. So I remember flipping the camera on and seeing you at Thanksgiving, all ready to go and about to have a meltdown because of what the boys were doing. And in that moment, I had to like figure out how to parent them through that moment so that, you didn't like throw a turkey at them. And what was helpful was for me to know what your childhood imprinting was from being parented and raised within your family, and then to be able to explain that to the boys. So like level one is you got to know yourself. Absolutely. Yeah. And you have to be able to articulate that. And level two, I would say, is knowing your spouse and being able to articulate and have your spouse's back, not to be like, well, your mom's like that because, blah, 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 but have your spouse's back to go, hey, what you don't understand is this is what it's like for her, the way she grew up, or this is what he went through growing up, and that's why he's parenting this way. And I actually support the way that they're parenting, or I support the way that they're trying. So it's not just a matter of we're trying to figure out like how to be the best parent. It's also having our spouse's back when there is something that is of like great value and concern to them, that you're going to go, I may not understand that to the depth that you do or feel that strongly about it, but I'm going to have your back in it and present a united front. And I'm going to go explain it to the kids, even when you're not able to do it for yourself.
Well, and not to go too deep on this, but just to kind of share, I did this recently with the boys too, where I was explaining, because they look up to you so much, Matt, the boys do, obviously, sons to father.
Not anymore, they're so tall.
But I mean, I had to explain to them that, you are passionate and and you're a go-getter. And one of the things I love about you is you never quit and you persevere through anything. Like you see obstacles in front of you and you are like, I am going to push through that and I'm going to see what I learn on the other side. And that's instinctual in all of us. It's definitely something, it's a quality that all of us want to have. And it's about being a self-starter and being self-motivated. But I had to explain to our 16-year-old who puts way too much pressure on himself. He really is that type A type of kid. He puts a lot of pressure on himself. And I had to explain to him that, for Matt had his hip rebuilt when he was 8 years old, and Matt had to learn how to walk again at 8. And they told him he would never be able to run or jump or play sports. And he was determined that he was going to prove everybody wrong, that he was going to have an amazing childhood. And by him digging that deep at such a young age, it created a character and a different kind of imprinting within him that I don't even know if I can fully grasp, because it was something that was instilled in him from such a young age. But it's something that's such a motivation for the rest of us. But it's something that we're all trying to, I think, sometimes catch up to, because Matt learned that from such a young age. So being able to champion your spouse and go, this is why your dad is motivated the way that he is, and why he encourages you the way that he does and asks you to dig deep, right? Because it's a gift that he's giving to you as a father from what he's learned. And so it's just an example of, we talk all the time, Matt and I do, when we talk to couples, about praising your spouse in private and having that integrity in how you think on your spouse and how you talk about your spouse in your mind, but also in public. And that includes your kids. How are you talking about your spouse around your children, around your friends? And that makes a huge difference. So I do want to go to this question because it is a really great question. It is, how do you spend individual time or alone time with each child as a single parent? We'll say a solo parent, right? When you have this spouse has 4 of them, so putting them to bed takes forever. So I'm going to say that, again, when you are solo parenting, it is a huge time for grace, and it is a huge time for, I'm constantly every day right now, even lowering my own expectations for myself. I mean, it's good for me to have a goal for the day, and here's what I'd like to accomplish, and here's how I'd like to spend time with the kids, and who I'd like to be for the kids today. I definitely don't achieve that goal every day. But I think it's about like asking myself, is that something that I can actually accomplish without burning myself out? And so I would just say, because this is a great question that I put this pressure on myself as well. It is wonderful and good for you to spend alone time with each of your kids when you can. But I'm going to just say, give yourself a little bit more grace. And maybe during the deployment is not when we put all of that pressure to make sure we're doing it every single day, and that bedtime is that time to do it. Because I know what bedtime looks like, especially when the kids are young. And by that point, I'll just be honest, I'm like, let's get you to bed so that I can shut my brain off for the rest of the day and actually take care of myself. And so trying to put that stress on yourself to be like the most amazing parent at that time of day is going to be extra challenging. And so I'm just going to encourage you, and this is even the counselor in me talking, to maybe stretch that out a little bit and test it for a week or two. And you can always change it if you want to, but maybe for the next week or two, what if you had, you spend one-on-one time with one child a night, right? And so one child a night gets that extra time. Everybody else goes to bed. But tomorrow night is the other kid's chance, right? But that gives you, this particular spouse, 4 nights a week where you're spending one-on-one time with one child, and what is that? 3 days where everybody just goes to bed. Everybody just goes to bed, and you have put in that quality time with them during the week. And here's the thing. They're not going to remember, please hear me say this because I have to say it in every webinar on parenting I ever do. They are not going to remember each daily moment that you spent time with them. It's going to be a blur, especially the young children, okay? They're going to walk away with the big trips that you took or the big birthday they had, and they might remember in general that you read to them, that night, right? Or that mom read to me during the deployment. I remember it was part of our routine that we read a book before bed, but they may not necessarily remember if they had that individualized time every single night. Okay. So
Mhm.
there are lots of ways that we can express love, and it doesn't have to be really intense every day time. And so now that my kids are teenagers, they don't want to spend as much time with me as they used to. And so there's times when I'm trying to spend that one-on-one time and they're like, I'm good. Right. Or I have to do what Matt said, which is step into their world and on a Saturday, sit down and actually play video games with the both of them. And that's what they felt was me investing time one-on-one with them, was shared time, not looking at each other, doing something intentional, and actually just shared. So, such a
Yeah.
great question. Great question. Okay.
So I was going to say about the bedtime,
Mm-hmm.
if you got a sec,
Yeah, please.
is be as Corie had, I actually had that idea and thought about it. So great minds think alike. I think that's a great idea. Another idea is, if you want to make sure that every child feels special, is the like 4 different nights each week, all 4 kids, all 3 other children, and you put one child to bed, and then you kind of go down the line, and then you just kind of mix it up as to who is putting to bed first, so that you make it really a family thing, that it doesn't have to be this individual one-on-one. You can actually form a really tight, close-knit family bond by bringing everybody together for bedtime, and put a kid to bed and then go down the line and put them all to bed.
Well,
Depends
and
really kind of, I guess, on the age of the children. Yeah.
yeah, and here's another way to stretch this out, guys, is you could, I learned, especially when my kids were young, we did game night once a week, not game night every night,
Hmm.
game night once a week. And it was like Thursday night. And sometimes we would sit down and actually play a game. And sometimes it was going to which I know we can't do during COVID as easily, but sometimes I would take them to the bowling alley on the installation, right? And that was game night, which was an easier, less like emotionally and socially involved for me. Like I can sit in a chair and watch you roll a ball, right? But it's still game night to them, right? But it was once a week, and you could take all 4 kids that one time a week. The kids take turns choosing whatever game that they want to do. And so it was their night that
Hmm.
you chose their idea. It still feels
Hmm.
like that individualized attention. Or maybe you do that with dinner. Like every Thursday night, we're going to get takeout from which restaurant would you like? And it's that individualized attention.
Hmm.
So I think we just need to remember like getting that individual attention looks in lots of different ways, and just kind of give yourself reduce the pressure just a little bit.
Hmm.
Okay. I feel like a lot of the questions that we've gotten have brought up the topic of resentment. And so I'd like for us to kind of get into that a little bit. Please, in the chat, give us some more questions if you have them for sure. Okay, let's see. So this is a big question. How can you handle resentment of your deployed spouse when you have everything to do at home and are burning out? So, just to start off, Matt and I have definitely had conversations in the last 2 months about how different our worlds are. And we've even had conversations, open conversations about how I was stressing myself out, that I was trying to show Matt that I was intentional and trying to be intentional towards him, but his schedule is different than my schedule is. This is also the first time I'm going through deployment with a full-time job. And so it's just a different deployment. And so it was definitely something that you and I needed to talk through, Matt, being able for me to be honest and go, I have so much on my plate, and I feel like you have less on your plate. And I feel like I can't bring that same quality to you that you're bringing to me. And I wasn't necessarily, or I'm not necessarily resentful that you have more free time than I do. Um, but there's definitely times when I find myself more tired by the end of the night. I'm like, whew, like, I don't know if Matt's this tired, but this is hard. This is really hard. Even with teenagers, I thought it was going to be a little bit easier, but it's just different. It's still hard. And so, I just want to start off by saying I can understand and relate to that. Here is my answer. And then Matt, if you have something that you want to respond to, please do. but I just want to say, when I read that question, number one, resentment. I'm so glad you guys are actually being honest and saying these things out loud, because our spouse community is definitely dealing with a lot of resentment, and they often don't know where to put it, and they don't know where to talk about it. And it feels like we're being negative and complaining, but it's an underlying struggle that the spouse community is having in general. And it's this anger and exhaustion, and it's not knowing where to put that anger. And you don't want to take it out on your spouse, and you can't take it to the military, and you don't want to leak out on your kids. And so you just bottle it up and you don't know what to do with it. And so here's what I try to do. When I find myself almost every night in a place of burnout, or irritability, or just definitely exhaustion, and it's a mixture of things. It's not just the kids. It's me trying harder this time to make sure I take care of myself too. And I have found that even like trying to make sure I have that time for myself in the calendar for the day, it still requires effort and energy to make sure I try to get a workout in. It takes effort, to take care of myself takes effort, to make dinner takes effort, right? And so there's definitely opportunities for burnout by the end. But at the end of every night, if I find myself burned out, and when you are erring on the side, burnout is like, I would say, on the other side of exhaustion, right? When I find myself there, it's one thing to be tired and exhausted, but when you find yourself on the other side, and we're going into anger, and it's kind of being directed at your spouse, to me, that's a red flag within me. And for anybody else, I would say that's a red flag, something to pay attention to, right? As soon as it pops in your head, it's pay attention to that. And I need to ask myself, what's going on there? And for me, I have to look back on my day, and I have to go, okay, what choices did I make today that just, I did the best that I could. I'm not going to beat myself up, but I did the best that I could. But what choices did I make today that contributed to my burnout? Because Matt and his schedule and what he's doing and not doing does not affect my burnout. Yes, I carry the responsibility of being a solo parent, which I would even argue that too, because he has the ability to be involved in parent. If I let him, and if we create opportunities for that. But if I'm that burned out, and every night I reevaluate that. Can I move my workout time to a different time? Do I need to sleep in because I really tried too hard for 3 days and I haven't given myself a really good chance to sleep? Like, what can I adjust in a different way and try something new tomorrow so that I don't end as exhausted as I did today? Kind of goes back to if I'm trying to spend individualized, intentional time with 4 children every single night, after like 6 months of that, you are going to burn out, right? So we just tweak and change things. And that doesn't mean we guilt ourselves and suddenly say, I'm not doing a good job parenting and I'm not a good mom. It's no, you making these changes and taking care of yourself will make you a better mom. Does that make sense? It will make you a better mom. I'll give you this example and then I'll pass it to Matt. Last night was a good example with the HelloFresh thing. Okay. It was a great idea, and I was looking forward to this great idea of making dinner. And my 16-year-old and I had decided this was going to be our intentional quality time to make this dinner together. And we had all the ingredients, like it could not have been more set up for success. But I let my son, I was trying to make the empathic decision for my 16-year-old to let him go take a break for a little while. We got home from school a little bit late, and I let him take a break for too long. Maybe I needed that break too, but we didn't start dinner until it was too late. We started dinner and making dinner so late, and dinner started taking longer to pull together than I thought. And so by the time we were getting to 7 and 7:30 to eat this dinner, we were so hungry. We were all bickering and snapping at each other. And I was exhausted and starting to get frustrated. And the dinner was great. And I was so glad we had it. But did we really have a good time together? Right? Did it really meet that intention that I was trying so hard to make it? And so I had to go to bed at the end of the night and go, okay, lesson learned. I'm not going to wait that long. Like if I have to start at 5 o'clock or 4:30 even, if I were going to do that again, I'm going to start earlier, and it's going to make for a much better night. So those were choices that I figured out that like I can adjust what I'm doing to myself, and I get to choose whether or not I'm actually going to burn out or not. Does that make sense? So, Matt, anything that you would add to that?
So we're not doing the HelloFresh again?
No, we are. We are doing one tonight.
Oh, okay. All right. Just making sure.
Just not the pork tenderloin with roasted vegetables.
Yeah. So going back to the to Cullinan stress test, do not underestimate that your burnout has a lot to do with we are moving into we're about to start almost the 11th, in some places 12th month of wearing masks and being over hyper cautious around people and places and things. All of our levels of anxiety have been up. And so it doesn't take anything for any of us to get to burnout at this point. We're all burnout, just merely existing. And even where I'm at in the world, it just reminds you, it's like, this is a global phenomenon. I mean, you can be in your little enclave and think, what are the kids going to be like having to grow up like this? And how is it going to change them? And what are they going to do? And how are they going to compete with the rest of the kids in America? Because kids around the world, I mean, I was even in a different country than where I'm at right now a few days ago, and still seeing kids on a playground and just with masks on. And you're like, wow, this is global. And it's hard to conceptualize the toll that it's taking on all of us. I even remember after the first deployment, Corie and I both went to the doctor and got ourselves checked up. And the doc was like, your adrenal glands for both of you are just done. They're exhausted. You have nothing left. And a lot of that was what she was going through as the care and the go team leader and responding to those casualties. And the same for me as a chaplain downrange responding to them. So there wasn't anything left. There was no water in the well for the bucket to pull up. And so, yes, we are all going through that burnout. But let's also put the blame in the not the blame. Let's explain it in the right ways that your burnout is going to feel worse, especially if you're going through a deployment during the time of COVID. Okay. So there's that. The other part is, in order to get through difficult things, you oftentimes have to figure out, what are you going to do with this later, or how will this pay off later? Something that constantly pulls you forward. If you're always sitting in the now and experiencing what you're experiencing right now and sitting in that moment and that feeling, the longer you ruminate on that feeling and you experience that feeling, the more intense it will get. And the more you will become overwhelmed by it as you begin to just kind of recycle those thoughts in your brain. So my favorite person in the world, other than my wife, well, my favorite famous person in the world that wrote stuff and came up with big ideas, he's a guy named Viktor Frankl. And he was a survivor of Auschwitz. And he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And it's been one of the things that's been foundational to who I am as a person. But what he did when he was in a concentration camp, and he was in a concentration camp for 3 years, and he lost both his parents and he lost his wife. But he would picture himself at the end of that time going back out into civilization, leaving the concentration camp, and teaching people in a university the psychology of surviving in a concentration camp. And that's what pulled him forward. He said the people that survived in a concentration camp were the ones that gave themselves and their lives meaning and purpose. Children are exhausting. No two ways about it. That is true. They give you as many years as they take away. All right. So you will trade energy and sleep.
Can I just say, I learned a new
Yeah.
phrase this week, that they're vipers in diapers.
Vipers and diapers. That's what they are. Yeah.
I love
and so, but you have a very vital role to play in reshaping the world. Like, you're reshaping the future of the world by reshaping little humans. And that, don't be overwhelmed by that. Just enjoy as much as you can the experience of pouring into them. This season will be over before you know it. And it doesn't feel like that right now, especially with young kids. It feels like every day is an eternity. And then you wake up and eternity once again, right? But it will be over before you know it. So find something each day. You know, every day isn't a great day, but you can find something great in every day. So, and I know that sounds like a really bad high school football coach, but
No, but there's so much truth there too. And I would also say, guys, that the comparison game is not gonna is it's never gonna be productive. It's just never gonna be productive. It's two
no.
totally different experiences. And I do want to say I see that somebody commented that it's not just about deployments and being separated. That there's a lot on a lot of your shoulders, even just when the spouse is home and you are
Mhm.
carrying a lot as a military spouse. And I agree with that completely. You could apply this to whether you're together or you're not together. But I just want to say, if there is something that you look at your spouse's world, let's use working out because that's a one that everybody brings up, and I know it's one that's probably comes up for me too. You know, of like they're working out for 2 to 3 hours a day, and I can't even get in a walk, right? Like that kind of resentment feeling kind of comes up in you, right? I just want to say when that comes up, instead of just harboring on that, like Matt's saying, like you are a person of worth and value. And if that's something that's bothering you, that you're not getting a chance to take care of yourself, then it's about setting boundaries with yourself and getting the
Mhm.
resources that you need to carve out that time to take care of yourself. It is difficult in every season. Right now, I feel like a taxi driver with teenagers. And so you have to adjust your life a little bit. When my kids were young during that first deployment, I felt like that. I just could not even get a walk in. But somehow by the end of that deployment, I had tapped into childcare or support from friends on the block that also were looking for that time away, your COVID buddies, whatever you want to call it. And whether it was going for stroller walks or stroller workouts, or whether it was going for a run in the stroller, or whether it was putting them in childcare long enough for me to go to the gym, get a workout in, go to the grocery store, and get everybody get home, that you can carve out that time for yourself. And I've heard from a lot of service members who've said, I want my spouse to be able to do those things. And I want to help her, like, figure out how to best have that time to do those things. So make it a conversation and champion that for yourself. It's so important. Okay. All right. So let's get into this one. How about my husband and daughter are so much alike, they argue a lot, which puts me in a hard place. So how do we navigate this? So you have anybody have like two that like are like fuel and fire together? Maybe it's siblings that are like that, but when you're trying to parent as a team and you're trying to go at it one way and your spouse is trying to go at another way, and it's like adding fuel to the fire. I do have one child that kind of bucks the system, wants to break the rules, wants to challenge almost everything. And I know there's been lots of opportunities, Matt, where you or I could be in either of those categories, right? Where sometimes I'm adding fuel to the fire and you've stepped in, or the other way around. So do you want to take that one first?
Wow. Yeah. Sorry. I was just in that moment thinking about the way that Jack and I trigger one another. Um, Without knowing more about the situation, um, it, I'm thinking. So I want to offer a thoughtful answer.
Do you want me to go first?
Well, as an adult, we have to begin to know ourselves. We can't parent well if we don't know ourselves because you don't know where you're coming from. If you're parenting without knowing yourself, really, honestly, then it's just an inner child fighting with an outer child. And I know that's what happens with Jack and I is that I've got this little inner child that's like, no, you're not going to win, fighting with an outer child that's like, I love, you're not going to win. And so it's the back and forth. Um, and what it is it's an overwhelming, for at least for us, it's a flooding of emotion that both of us don't really have the natural means and how we're built genetically almost to be able to control, that it requires for me a higher executive functioning in the front part of my brain to be able to acknowledge that I'm have an emotional flood, and then to be able to suppress that in order to deal with what's going on with the child in front of me. And I find that when I'm able to do that, when I know myself, then I'm that much more able to speak truth into that child, um, for what they're experiencing. And I think, we create little me's, we create little us's in our life. And, each child has a little bit from both parents usually. And so to be able to, if you understand yourself well, you'll be able to tap into the heart of the child that much more. And so that if that is happening in parenting, and you're in a crazy cycle with a child, it's like when you were leading that when you were leading that training, where I was working, and they had to the person was like, yeah, well, who has to go first in that? And you're like,
Yeah.
well, the more mature one.
Yeah.
And that's really hard. And I know that's easy to say, but I'm 43, and it's taken me decades to get there. But it requires that hard work. It's not always easy to be an adult. Sometimes we have to go talk to a professional and allow that professional to talk to that inner child right there, and whatever woundings and healing needs to occur to be able to do that. I guess that's how I'm weighing in on it. What do you
No,
think?
I love that answer. And as you were talking, I was thinking about, we all have the ability to kind of get triggered by something our kids do, because it does
Hmm.
kind of go back to that imprinting thing, right? Like what triggers Matt is different from what triggers me, and the why behind both of those. And I would say that the times where I've seen, let's say, Matt triggered, it's far easier for me to step in as a helpmate in that situation to Matt, right? Like I'm not trying to break up their relationship or over control it. I want them to win. I want them to win at this relationship, right? And so, when your spouse is triggered, I think it's having the mindset that you get to be their helpmate, right? Because that emotional flooding happens. But here's the thing, when that emotional flooding happens, it's really hard to accept help, because the
Hmm.
emotional flooding makes you want to just finish it or fix it or be right or whatever childish, thing you're going through in that moment, right? And so I'm not
Hmm.
saying that, your spouse is childish, but what I'm saying is we're all capable of getting triggered and having
Hmm.
a hard time seeing the right perspective. And so it's taken some great conversations for Matt and I over the years to learn how to do that tag team. And we're not always perfect at it. And so there's been many moments where I've been triggered and I'm not even sensing just how pulled in I am to adding fuel to the fire before he kind of like tags me, like just kind of puts his hand on my shoulder and it's like, hey, like let's take a time out, let's go talk about it. Or he will be that helpmate to say, hey, he'll start talking instead. And so it is going to take some conversation with your spouse, because some are going to receive that as you controlling the situation, and that's why it's so important. Or
Hmm.
disrespecting their attempts to try to parent, because
Hmm.
sometimes you don't think you're triggered and you really think you're doing the best parenting you could ever be doing, and your spouse comes in and tries to help, right? And you feel like they are interrupting and it's disrespectful and it's making the children, not, appreciate the way that you're parenting it. Like you get into a conflict, right? And so
Yeah.
I think what I'm saying, first of all, is we all have the ability to be triggered. We all have the ability to have emotional flooding happen. And it's having the conversations as a team for how can I best help you in those situations. And then the only thing else I would say on that is there are times to be a helpmate if you have talked about it and agreed on it and and help where you can. However, I'm not saying for you to insert yourself in the middle between them all the time and that becomes your
Hmm.
role. Um, I somebody once shared with me a long time ago that kids need to see two different kinds of parents. They don't need the same parent two times. They need to see dad
Mhm.
react to something different than the way that mom reacts to it. And they learn something about the world from that. They're going to have different kinds of bosses and friends and relationships and personalities around them. And they're going to have to figure out, what do they think about that? And how are they going to handle that and react to it? And so there's a benefit for them seeing two sides. There's also hurt that's going to happen. There's also relationships that are going to go through rough patches. And so while I want to be a helpmate so that, let's say Matt and Jack in that scenario succeed and have a wonderful bond, and I want to make sure that happens, there's also times that I just have to let them own that relationship. And as your kids get old enough, it's being able to say to your kids, hey, I think like if they come to you and say, I really don't like the way that dad handled that situation. That's kind of an older conversation, but it's being able to go, I think you ought to take that to your dad and ask him
Mhm.
about it or talk to him about that instead of me giving them the answer. Because if I give the answer on their problem, then they don't get to
Mhm.
resolve and grow in that relationship. I need my child and my husband to own that relationship. And it's the other way for me too. I am
Mhm.
responsible for my relationship with my sons. And if there is something that goes wrong with that, Matt's going to definitely champion it. But it's going to be up to me and the boys to work that out. And the sooner we get into a pattern and a rhythm in their upbringing of making it a safe place for them to bring their concerns, their requests, or could you do this differently? The sooner we're going to launch them into the world where they can have those tough conversations in other relationships.
Yeah. I
Okay.
think the thing that we don't like seeing in our kids is the thing that exists in ourselves that we don't want to deal with.
That's really tough, right? Um, Even way back, I do see, way back, I remember even when the kids were really young, I tried to make it a pattern, to ask them maybe every 3 months, like, what could I do different? Like,
Mhm.
what could I do different during the day? Or, that's really tough to hear those answers. And even as they get older, but it's tough to hear it, but it's important. So, okay,
What you got?
so there's some questions about, Matt wanting us to go through some of the different stages of childhood and what each child may or may not need from their deployed parent during those stages. And so
Mhm.
let's talk a little bit about, let's kind of go through. I definitely address some of this in your listening guide that you have access to. And so we can definitely go through what that child needs because we always get this question. My child is really young, let's say 3 or under, and I'm trying so hard to make opportunities to connect with, we're going to use stereotypes here to make it easy, but to connect with their dad who's deployed. And I'm worried that when, dad comes home, the child's not going to recognize him and how that's going to feel. And there's a lot of anxiety surrounding that. It's the biggest question I get. And so we're going to just kind of go through the stages real quick and just kind of talk about like some things that you can do, to reduce your anxiety, surrounding those different stages and how they can stay connected with their parent. Okay. So, infancy to toddlers,
Mhm.
and we'll even go into preschool here, age level. Um, Let me start off with this metaphor. Okay. Um, Kids start inward. So think of it like a metaphor, like you're looking at this child, and kids that are very young, even through elementary school, they're kind of looking down and they're kind of just looking at themselves, right? Or maybe picture them holding a mirror, right? They're holding their own mirror, and what they're thinking about the world and what they think about themselves is largely just whatever's in their head, right? And some of it's coming from their parents too, like, how we receive love and all that
Mhm.
kind of stuff. That attachment is really important. But they're not super aware. I mean, they're playing with kids on the playground, but they're not super aware of like what everybody else is thinking, right? They're not thinking about what that neighbor kid is thinking or whether or not that neighbor kid feels insecure or what's going on in their world. And so that's why some of those younger kids don't remember a lot of deployments. They don't remember, even some of the conversations that you had because they're really just so in the moment, in the present moment, in their own world. and whatever game or Lego they're playing with. And that's what they remember. My 16-year-old, like most of his childhood is basically Indiana Jones and Legos and VeggieTales. That's it. That's everything his childhood was. And so, when you get into middle school, it's almost like this child kind of looks up and realizes, oh, wow, there's kids around me and they have thoughts and feelings that might involve me. And so I don't even know how to have that conversation at the lunch table, but they start like kind of waking up to an awareness that there's other people around them and that might matter. Right. And there's all that struggle through middle school. That's why middle school is so terrible. Right. Then when you get into high school, I want you to picture the same youth, the same kid, but now they're surrounded by all of their peers and all of their peers are holding mirrors. Right. And so who they are is more of a reflection of what their peers say about them. Right. And so all of that concern into who am I and whether or not I'm accepted comes from those peers, and they see themselves as their peers see them. Okay. So I want you to think about that as we go through these different stages and apply it to deployments and what might be happening in deployments, and what you can do. Okay. So, Matt was saying, you were looking back through some of our emails. What did we do with the kids when they were like toddler during that first deployment? What did you see that we were doing in some of those emails connecting with you?
So one huge thing was uh, military has a cool factor. I mean, that's one thing that always wins. Basically every branch. I mean, you've got a really cool factor of things you can. I mean, for us in the Army, it's taking a kid over to see tanks, and I mean, taking pictures of a tank or you doing something cool, because that lends this air of, wow, they're doing something important. Wow, this is, I always felt like Aiden was looking at it like, oh, this is so cool that you get to do that. And he kind of made me feel cool doing it. I'm like, I'm not driving the tank. I just know the guy that drives the tank and I'm standing next to it. And he's like, I've never been that close to a tank. And so sometimes it's playing into that cool factor of just being able to share what neat, interesting things that you're doing. And, I know if anybody's out there that's on staff listening, you're like, what do I do? Show them a PowerPoint? But, you can still translate it into, the impact that you're having, or the people that you're seeing, or the interactions you're having. So you can frame it in a different way. One thing that I do remember, like the video I remember of Aiden, and you were just talking about how kids are like, pay attention to themselves, was Corie did this great thing. She would, it was back in, what was that, 2009, 2010. And Aiden would get on camera with his little Indiana Jones hat and his jacket that had that little fringe around the top. And he'd be like, I'm Indiana Jones. And he'd be doing that whole thing. And he'd be like, Dad, I love you. And I love you. And just, ooh, ba, ba, ba. And he's just watching himself in a camera. And he totally went from, I'm interacting with Dad, to, wait a minute, I'm on the TV. Look at my hands. So they get distracted real easy. So that's the joy of young children, is really you just have to keep them entertained for just a couple minutes at a time. That's why you get exhausted, because it's a million couple minutes throughout the day. So one thing that we did was we read books, or I read books, and then I actually sent the book to them. And that's a great program that the USO has that we absolutely love. That makes a huge difference. The ability to connect through reading, and kids will, especially if it's a book that's meaningful to them, and it becomes something that they just hold on to. And they, ours, it was polar bears past midnight. So right. I don't know what happened to the polar bears after midnight. I always thought people out after midnight were just like thugs or thieves or something. But yeah, gremlins, that's what happened with the polar bears. That's what wrong with the Antarctica. So anyway.
What? No. So no, it's a great point though, is that you know what though, like even if you record the kids talking to themselves on the camera and sending that to your spouse, like it doesn't have to be perfect, and don't stress about like they have to have this super high quality conversation with the other parent, because I mean, no, a toddler level, even during the day when you're at home, you're not having super deep, in-depth relational conversations, right? So it's really just about sharing life. So I mean, there were several times that I would just kind of set up the camera, and whatever they were doing was whatever they were doing, and I would send that to Matt, and it was like great for him to just see whatever they would do if they had the time, right? Or see them talking to themselves. It was just about seeing them on occasion when he could. And so, again, this is take the pressure off a little bit. Have definitely take the pressure off of live conversations, because there's so many opportunities for technology to go wrong and putting a lot of pressure on that. So even if you're like Navy and you're just going long periods of time apart and you're not even getting those daily conversations, yes, do the best that you can with live, but have those stored up recorded things that you can share. Matt and I use a drive, like a Google Drive, that's just for sharing pictures and videos that he can look at his convenience when it's a different time of day while we're sleeping and he can't connect, right? So you can store up some of those videos. And then like when they come to shore, he can, binge watch all of those videos of the kids. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, absolutely. If they're under 4, they may not know it's not live.
That's
So they
right.
may just know that they can't actually talk back. So, I mean, I imagine if you're out there on a ship for 30 days, that gives you an opportunity to record like 30 5-minute goodnight things. Put that in a Google Drive, and then every night, right at bed, you just download another one. And oh, guess what? It's another video. We can't talk to the, mom or dad right now, but we can just listen to them, and they just get that touch point on a daily basis. But they're all there, and you just have to pull them down. And great thing is, like after 30 days, they probably don't remember what day 1 was, so you can just reuse it.
Very true. Very true. So just to assure those of you out there, um, my 16-year-old, even my 13-year-old, when I ask them, they do not remember the first 2 deployments. They remember that they happened. They remember some key dates. They remember talking to dad over Skype, but they don't remember it as like this terrible time of their childhood where their father was absent. So I just want to ease your fears on that a little bit and ask you to just relax and make sure you take care of yourselves. And service members, definitely make sure that you are touching base, record your own stuff and send it their way. Like record just a conversation or not just about what you're doing, but ask questions. You can do a conversation that goes back and forth where you record, here's my like 3 questions for you. When you do your next video, see if you can answer those questions and send them back to me, like something like that, right? So it kind of creates this ongoing conversation. Okay, so let's go on to elementary school is a little bit more of that. They're just a little bit more aware. Care packages can be coloring sheets and anything that they do in school. We sent all kinds of random stuff to Matt that I think he enjoyed and kept, and then they all came back at the end of that deployment. But I would send some of my favorite things, and every now and then if they could write like a little letter or sign their name or something like that, or just show that they're learning to read or color in the lines or whatever that looks like, is a way to keep kids connected. And can I just say one of the things that, when I was overseas and it was only like, I think a 9-day trip, 7 or 9-day trip, it was this really interesting role reversal where I got to go to Afghanistan and call you, Matt, and wake you up at like 5:30 in the morning because it was the only time I could call. And it was a brief call from the USO. And I remember calling you and I was so excited to share like all of these things that I did that day. And there was helicopters in the background and I just could not wait to get on the phone. And it was the perfect role reversal. But I want to tell you what I learned from that as a spouse is that when I called and you picked up the phone at 5:30 in the morning, which I loved the fact that the boys were like snuggling up with you, which because so many spouses do that too. You got on the phone obviously super tired at 5:30 and like did not have the same energy that I had, and couldn't match the level of intensity that I was bringing to my need to want to connect to you. And I found myself wrestling with that in the moment because I was like, no, wait, no, do you hear how excited I am to tell you about my day? And like, I'm missing you guys. And he was like, yeah, okay. all right, like I'm just waking up, like I need a second, you know. And so I think what I learned from that is um, definitely feeling what it, for just a brief moment, what it's like to be in the spouse's shoes, in the service member's shoes, and just realizing that, you know, there's always going to be different odd timings of intensity and things to share, and that there needs to be that understanding that everybody's in a different spot, grace for when people are in a different spot. But I imagine it can be very lonely at times to have that intense need of wanting to connect with your family, and the kids like spending just a short, brief amount of time on the phone, and how that can hurt your heart when you're missing your family so much. And so I don't know if I have all the words to be able to comfort you in that. But I will say that I know that that's really hard to try to stay connected. I want to encourage you to not shut that off and numb it out, and just not do it. Like I think that it is worth
Mhm.
it. I would rather feel the hurt and the discomfort and the missing of someone, because that's what brings connection, and that connection is a relationship that's supposed to bring you joy, and a desire and a want to come home.
Mhm.
And that's worth
Mhm.
feeling that more than feeling apathy from numbing it out. So, Matt, I don't
Yeah.
know. That's a tough one.
No, there's gold in that. There's gold in those negative feelings, and you got to take that. You got to store it up, and you have to treasure it, because that's the thing you have to lean back on when you reintegrate, and then when you're doing life again, and you start having petty arguments. Because you look back and you're like, oh no, I'm not. We're not going to argue about that anymore, because I know how precious these moments are, and we forget about that. But you got to store that up and remind yourself consistently. Okay, I'm going to choose precious moments over petty moments in order to really keep that jewel. And like you're saying, one of the biggest difficult things in deployment is time zone differences, because you're always going to be out of sync. Somebody's going to be waking up, somebody's going to be going to bed, just had dinner, somebody's done with their day, somebody's starting their day. And so time zone differences have a huge deal to play in that. So I wanted to talk about teens. Are we at teens yet? Is that?
Yes, and as you get into that, I want to hear from you guys in the chat. Like, tell us, share with us, because we only have our experience, right? And what I've heard from some other families, but share in the chat how you keep your how you stay connected with your kids if you're a service member, or if you're a spouse. What
Mhm.
are some of the strategies that you do to help that connection during these different stages? Because there's so much wisdom in the room that you guys can share. And we'll collect some of that, and I'll make sure that it's in the listening guide for the recorded version. So share with us what you guys are
Yeah.
doing. Or maybe if you're like a seasoned spouse, what's worked in the past and you're really glad that you guys did that. So those are good. Those are already coming in. So Matt, yeah, let's talk about tweens and teens.
So one interesting thing is you know, a couple of years ago, I just decided to invest in the kids to help in a way that I did not know all about kind of how the world worked at, like, 13, 14, 15. And I kind of wish I had, only because it would have been I think I would have gone in more prepared for saving and investing, and being honest and being pragmatic, not being honest, but being honest with like what the reality of the world is, and being pragmatic at it. So, part of going through a deployment, part of being in the military, is it has a lot of great benefits to it, and has a lot of very steady paychecks. And so um, going through a deployment sometimes is explaining to your child, look, we just came through coronavirus, right? And thousands of people lost jobs, weren't able to pay for their homes, weren't able to do a lot of things, but we in the military had a consistent paycheck, we had consistent good benefits. And so to be able to explain to a kid, hey, right now, especially a teenager, they can comprehend this. Right now this isn't easy, for me to be gone or me to be busy working, and I know that I would rather be at home spending time with you, but this when it just comes down to it, this pays the bills really well, and this helps me express who I am in the world. I mean, this is who I believe I am built to be, and I've got to go own that, and I've got to experience that, as much as I'm going to encourage both of my boys to go be who they are built to be out into the world, but also to be very pragmatic about it, and to understand that you can't nothing comes easy, and you can't get to where you want to go by just trying to do the simple, easy things. I mean, the 9 to 5 sounds really good, but you can't really start off in your 20s and 30s working a 9 to 5, being able to save and invest and plan for the future. So part of raising a teenager is turning them into an adult. Part of turning a teenager into an adult is making them think about these adult things, helping them to conceptualize and to be able to compartmentalize and go, okay, so I understand that while this is not easy, this is actually a very good thing, and it's a benefit, and for us it's a blessing. And to be able to have that job, to do those things, and to continually progress. So just to be able to communicate with them adult to adult, I think is very meaningful.
No, and I think it also brings up strengths again, and what each parent kind of brings to the family and brings to that child, right? And so I love these comments, by the way. I'm going to get back to that strengths thing in a second, but I love the fact that some of you are saying, like, one of you, like, you have dinner conversations every night because it lines up with the time zone. And I love the consistency that that brings. One of you was talking about how dad shows that it's dark outside, and the kids are super curious about that because it's a different part of the world, and that can be super exciting and different. So all of these are such really, really great ideas. And so I kind of want to go back because, Matt, you said something that made me think about it, that like when you go back to the kids when they're really young, one of the things that, when we talk about not wanting to be the bad guy and you're parenting and solo parenting all the time and carrying that burden, one of the many things that your spouse brings is sometimes a different voice, a different pitch, a different tone. And so sometimes just hearing him read books was a different voice than my voice. The boys almost got like so used to hearing mom's voice that they stopped hearing it. It's, so having that different voice was really, really helpful. And that's a good reason of why having your spouse play a part in discipline where you can. Like, I would say a little, graceful, kind of discipline. It's really tough to really hammer down on a child from a distance, especially when they're not there to give hugs and physical affection as a follow-up. So maybe they're not doing the hardest of discipline from a distance, but having those like really good conversations of, let's talk through what happened and why that happened, why you made that choice, and still having a loving, kind conversation from the service member or from, if it's a father, let's say, having that different voice and different approach is still really important. And if they are, I just want to encourage you guys out there that if you don't have, I put this in the handout, and I want to make sure that I say this the right way. If there's a long period of time of them hearing their father's voice, getting them involved in an appropriate place where there is other male voices, let's say, right? We would switch this if it's like, so a family member that gets involved with weekly calls, right? Or coach on a sports team, something like that, where you don't feel like it's always just your voice is the only voice that they hear. And so there's something about having the village come together and help you and support you as you need it, as it's appropriate. So I just want to stress that it needs to be appropriate relationships. But going back to your teens and tweens, I just want to say that's something that Matt has been very helpful with me on, is that, there's some conversations that I know that I kind of lead out on, and that's my thing, and that's what I do with my kids, and that's my style. But sometimes what the boys need is they just need to hear it from dad, the way that dad would say it. And so, like, whether it's talking about what's happening in the world right now or what's going on with school, I know one of the days that I wasn't able to address what was going on with our 13-year-old. I told Matt was asking how he could help. And I said, hey, can you reach out to Jack and talk with him about what's going on with his friends at school and some ways that he could handle some of those conversations and kind of brainstorm that with him. And that set Matt up with a topic, right? And it set him up for success to have like not one of those conversations where they just stare at each other, but they actually had a purposeful conversation about that. Or there was another time that I don't even know what the boys were bickering about, but you were able to address it with them and parent them through that. And I still don't even know what the issue was, but they resolved it, the three of them together. And I was so grateful. And honestly, I was so grateful to not even know what the topic was. I still don't even want to know what the topic was. It just was lovely that you were able to step in and handle that with love and grace and great conversation. The boys were like, "Oh yeah, Dad was great. That was so helpful. We totally solved it." And it was like, "Oh, good. Don't even tell me about it." Like, so there's some definite ways that you can have them get involved. That sometimes they just need to hear it, the other style other than yours. Again, they need to learn different styles. So we have
Yeah,
not.
and discipline isn't only about one. Discipline is not only about um, behavior, maladaptive or dysfunctional behavior has happened, and we need to address that. Action reaction type thing. You can also implement some sort of like ongoing form of accountability, so that the deployed parent has an opportunity to do a check-in once a week, to maybe look at a chore chart or to look at a behavior chart and say, hey, hey, good job, you were kind, you were courteous, you took care of your chores, you didn't talk back, you got 5 out of 7 stars this week, way to go, good job, you get an A+, or hey, you only got 3 stars out of 7, tell me about that, why is that going on? And so it can form not just a level of like discipline or correcting a behavior, but it can also be a part of being accountable to hopefully intervene in that behavior in the future, is a means to co-parent at that, because you can't always be there right at the moment the behavior happens and react to it.
Well, and I love that they're talking in the chat about using the 5 minute check-in, which was from our last month's, where I included the 5 minute check-in in the listening guide. It's just a really like
Mhm.
four questions actually, 4 questions that you want to try to answer in a sentence or less, which is great for kids. But it gives you something to talk about. It's a way to check in each day, like what's been on, how are you physically feeling? What have your thoughts been lately? What emotions do you feel about that? And what do you need today? Like, I can't tell you
Mhm.
how many times I go to my kids and go and run through those questions. Matt can run through those questions, and you would be surprised, kids' ability to not only answer those questions, but you're actually helping them form the frontal cortex of their brain when they're thinking through those questions.
Mhm.
So it's a very, very powerful tool that's so simple, so simple.
Mhm.
Okay. So, Matt, in the time that we have left, I'm kind of thinking that we should maybe rapid fire some of these questions. And then
Okay.
maybe we just won't like have both of us necessarily answer both questions, but we'll just kind of go back and forth and see what we
I'll
come up
raise my hand if I decide to answer that question.
with. Okay. Okay. Let's see. All right, so real quick, more tips on how to stay connected with texts, packages. Last time you talked about the journal, but I can't remember the details.
I'll talk about the journal.
Go.
Okay. So it's called Day One. For a minute, I almost said OneNote, but it's called Day One Journal, and it's available on iOS and Android. And we don't get any. I don't own any stock in Day One. This isn't that sort of thing. But what it has been is, for me, every day it's been an opportunity to wake up first thing and go into the office, sit down with a journal, and before I turn on any sort of email, before I respond, look at social media or anything, it's just opening the journal and thinking about, it's basically a 5 minute check-in that for me takes about 45 minutes to detail what it is, what my experiences are, if I'm taking pictures the day before, to upload those pictures, describe what's happening. It's an opportunity for me to be able to look back on this experience of the deployment on a day-to-day basis, and to see what that progress was like. And it's born out of a couple things. The first is I very much regret not documenting what I was thinking and feeling and experiencing on every day of our first deployment, for multiple reasons. That I could be able to look back and go, okay, that's what I did, that's how I responded, that's what I was going through. But I feel a little bit better at that now, because I went back and took emails that we'd exchanged during the first deployment and entered them into a new journal called the Afghanistan Journal, and put them in there according to the day. And so you can see the way that we're responding as if we'd used the journal. And so it was just amazingly interesting to see exactly how much we were sharing. But there are 151 entries in that Afghanistan journal. And that's a lot of good stuff to see how we were progressing. And one of the things I specifically remember about almost every one of Corie's journal entries in the first 4 months, when I went back and reread them in that Afghanistan journal, was, hey, I can't write a lot. I'm really tired. The boys have me exhausted. I'm just barely making it, but I love you and I miss you. And that was it. I was the one that had the time to be like, and I did this, and
It's
then I felt
poetry.
this, and I experienced that. But well, I had the time. So, and that makes the difference. But it's a way that you can go back. Our lives are built on shared experiences. And when things get lean and you don't have enough shared experiences in that moment, to be able to go back and look at the ones you have in the scrapbooks of life, that gives you that little breath of fresh air of, we can make it through this. We've been through difficult things. We can do hard things together as a family. So it is the day one journal. You can, and Corie the other day, she was so exhausted, she couldn't write in it. And I was like, just do a video entry. And so she just did a video entry into it, just hit record, and with a spoonful of peanut butter told me about her day. And it was wonderful, but that was all. This is what went on, and I'm going to bed. Love you, good night. So
Yep.
day one
And
journal.
we also got a couples cube deck of cards as discussion starters for when we didn't know what to say to each other, if we did have a phone call, and that's also been helpful. All right, so Matt, we're going to have to make them faster answers for the rest of these, okay?
Sorry.
So I'll take this next one. How to handle the meltdowns of a 4-year-old that sometimes take hours to come down. We've tried everything and nothing seems to work. I'm just going to very quickly answer this because I had a child that really melted down a lot. Again, I don't know what's going on with your child. I know you guys are really working hard on that. There's temper tantrums are normal for young kids. Usually I will say, looking back as a parent, there was things that I could not know that was going on in that child, whether they were hungry, lonely, tired, and we do the best that we can to figure out what that is. My advice from being that parent that was also trying to do that by myself is I learned to try to stay ahead of it as much as possible. So I know when I was solo parenting with a child that was prone to meltdowns, is that I figured out, especially at the beginning of that deployment, I figured out I could go out for an outing one time a day was all that kid could handle. Any more than that, and they were like too tired, too exhausted, it threw off the rest of the day. And so that order and structure for me turned into, you know what? I can do one outing a day, and that is all we can do for my own sanity's sake. And that was my way of proactively trying to figure out what tends to throw them off in that schedule. But I know that can be really difficult. Make sure you surround yourself with some good support and take care of yourself as much as possible. But we can expand on that perhaps another time specifically, but that's really, really tough. Okay, we're going to go down to... we touched on time differences. For sure, that's definitely a challenge. Again, those recordings I think really help a lot. And so trying not to put so much pressure on live moments, and you'd be surprised, they'll look back and go, oh, I was totally connecting with dad. And they just aren't remembering the fact that there were recordings back and forth that everybody was sharing. So that's just as meaningful. All right, how do you determine how much screen time is too much for any age when you are solo parenting and your spouse is away? I think this is a couple's decision, right, Matt? At the end of the day, you kind of have to decide when you're the one at home. You have to do the best you can to make the decision that you feel like is right for you that day. Definitely high level. I think most of the research, we would all agree that less screen time is better. There's going to be moments where you turn to screen time because you're merely surviving that doctor's appointment or whatever that you need to get through that. And I think, again, grace for yourself. But I would definitely say my rule of thumb is there are those times that I want to turn towards giving them that screen time because I need it, they need it, we all need to chill out and take a break, and I'm not going to beat myself up for that. But if I'm turning to that every single day as a coping for all of us, then that's another red flag for me that this is turning into something that we're kind of devouring instead of addressing what it is that's bringing stress into our life in the first place, that's having us turn to that and escape right? So I'd rather it be something that we are choosing, that we get to do because it's something that we enjoy or that we've earned the time to do. We have a rule that we're trying out in our house right now that usually we have no screen time or no video games during the week, only on the weekends for 4 hours on the weekend days. But the boys negotiated with me and they basically said, hey, if our schoolwork is done, our grades are good, our chores are done, and can we have an hour or so before dinner? And I was like, you know what? Let's try it. Let's just see what happens and see if it's something that we can actually do. I wanted to respect the fact that they were asking for it in the right way. And I found that I actually needed that hour before dinner myself. And it gave me kind of that quiet space to like kind of compose myself and kind of help me figure out what I wanted for the evening. And so it kind of ended up being a win-win. And on days where they didn't get those things done, they didn't do it. So I think you just kind of have to work it out and what's best for your family. All right, Matt, I'll give you this one. My service spouse is upset that I want a house cleaner to help out with chores while they're away. How can we discuss this topic so we don't end up in another argument?
Then I think it goes back to like, so what are the expectations? Is it just is it a financial issue that it is trying to save money or can't afford it, or is it a financial issue? So I mean, I don't know. You have to have the conversation about why are they upset about it? But then also to be able to stand on your feet and go, look, I can't do this without it, and that's just kind of the way it is. And I mean, concessions just have to be made at times. And I realize that because I'm not there to help form the quorum, this is me, and I believe this is true. I get less of a vote as long as it's not illegal, unethical, or immoral, and it's within the family values that we have. I get less of a vote about what happens there at the house because I'm not there to assist in mitigating it. Just as much as I wouldn't expect that my supporting spouse, she may go, well, just stop working at that time, or do this or don't do that, and you're like, well, I can't, because it just has to be done. So I have to own my world and give her the freedom to own her world.
So good. Okay.
All grown up.
I would echo all of that. I would say the same thing. I've heard of free resources available to assist me while my spouse is gone, such as lawn mowing services, car washes. Where should I be looking to find this information? I don't have a specific website on that. Maybe somebody watching does have a website on that. But I will say, first of all, definitely look for them. There's a lot of churches that surround installations that might have a ministry like that, where they're offering helping with lawn mowing. I know that there was one church that we were part of that did that they actually would go out and mow lawns. They would help with the car, changing the oil in the car. And sometimes churches don't know that that's even a need until you bring it up, right? So you might be able to start something in your community that's a huge need just by simply asking for it. So don't be afraid to ask some of the churches in your local area if they know about it or if it's something that they do. I know on the installations, for the most part, on installations, if you have entered in that your spouse is deployed, they will usually come and do your lawn, definitely with helping with house maintenance and those sorts of things. So make sure you check with your installations about the support that they provide during a deployment for sure. Okay, Matt, let's see. I mean, a lot of these are for at home, but so let me just real quick go through. What do I say to my kids when they start to cry and say that they miss their parent? What do I say to them to make them feel better? I think we kind of covered that a little bit. Like, it's okay to feel it and it's okay to step into what they're feeling and allow them to have that feeling. You want your kids to miss their mom or dad, right? So it's not about you making them feel better so they don't feel that anymore. It's about, sometimes just saying, I miss daddy too, or I miss mommy too. And so that's okay for you to miss them. Would you like to record a video for them? Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, that's what I was saying exactly, is redirect that energy. What do you miss about them? And then how can we express that to them? And then involve them in being able to send that letter off, color a picture, write a note, record a video to be able to express it, and then to be able to have the deployed parent to be able to respond to that and to be able to turn that, you turn that heartache into a connection, because that's what that's there. It's that it's missing that connection. So reframe it, turn it around into a connection.
Very good. Two more questions I have, Laura and Trish. One of them is, I've heard such things as taking M&Ms out of a jar to count down when my spouse is coming home. But what are some other fun ways to keep the kids involved in a positive household environment to count down the days, or is this only hurting the situation? Such a great question. I have definitely tried the countdowns. You're going to see a lot of opinions on that. I think it honestly depends on the kids and the kids' personality. So there's no perfect way to answer this. I have seen some kids that really just struggle because it feels like forever. And I've had some spouses that just broke down in tears making like as many pieces of paper for a paper chain that they needed to make in order to, like, it can be more discouraging for you than it can be for the child. And maybe they're loving getting those M&Ms, but you waking up every day and seeing that many M&Ms in a jar is discouraging. And so I think you have to make the best decision for you. I definitely think as you get really close to that separation ending, that having a countdown that makes sense for that child at that developmental level is helpful. Our teenagers can understand when the school semester is over, or in the spring or around Easter. Like, they have the ability to kind of think through that a little bit better than, let's say, a toddler who can't comprehend that amount of time. So if it's like an elementary school student, I'm going to really maybe count down when we get to 10 days, right? What can they count to, and what they count down easily, and then maybe start there. But it says something about being able to have a rhythm, and having that rhythm and not having your constant countdown remind you that your rhythm is not a new normal. Like, sometimes you just need to let the deployment just kind of be the normal for right now, and everybody settle into that, and not have so much anticipation. And Matt, the last one is about making nutritious meals for my kids while my spouse is away, and the struggle to do that. So Laura, if you want to go ahead and come back on, I think the answer to this is a mentoring that somebody gave to me during our first deployment, when things got really, really stressful, and it was a really tough time for us. And it was a tough time to parent because the unit was going through a lot. But I remember a mom that was much older than me just looked at all of us and said, you do realize it's okay every now and then to give your kids Cheerios for dinner, right? Like, you're not going to win, or you're not going to win the worst parent of the year because you gave your kids chicken nuggets and macaroni and cheese for the second time that week, especially when it was a really intense, terrible week, right? And I think for me, it gave me like the permission to just like, whew, oh yes, Shawnee, like, how many times have I made breakfast for dinner? Yes. And so again, taking that stress off of yourself. However, again, same thing as video games and screen time. I think if we can aim for it to be an exception, not the rule, right? Where we can say, you know what, I have goals for myself, I have goals for my kids, but I'm leaving time and space for moments where we just need to like have breakfast for dinner. So Matt, anything else before Laura jumps on?
No, just being graceful. Be graceful with yourself during this time. It's just a season. It will end, and you can come out on the other side better.
Thank you, Laura, for the opportunity.
Yeah, no, thank you both. And Matt, how you closed it was what I was just thinking, that to everyone watching and listening, and that will be, just trying to give yourself that grace during these difficult times. It is hard, but I think both of you have given us really great examples and some really good feedback on what we can do as parents to help during this time, and stay united and work as a team, and that it doesn't have to be one versus the other. So I really appreciate you taking your time and your energies and giving us all your wisdom. We really appreciate that.